All right, good morning. It is Saturday, September the 13th. I'm Ali Velshi. If you happen to have your pocket constitution with you, it's going to become very useful in the next few minutes. This week, the Supreme Court gave federal agents the green light to geographically, racially, linguistically profile people in the course of immigration sweeps in Los Angeles. Now, in doing so, it shattered one of the bedrocks of the American legal tradition. And my goal today is to leave you with a clear understanding of just how grave this Supreme Court decision is. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution begins with these words: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The right of the people to be secure in their persons. Few parts of the Bill of Rights drew more directly from the lived experiences of Americans at the time than this one. American colonists lived under a British crown that tried to police their private lives, their communications, and their gatherings. The Townshend Acts of 1767 authorized writs of assistance, warrantless searches that let the king's men storm homes and shops at will. No reasonable suspicion needed, no rights, just raw power. The Coercive Acts of 1774 went further, forcing colonists to house British troops in their own homes. The presence of troops on their streets, in their homes, the intrusive raids, the constant surveillance, these were not abstract grievances. These were daily humiliations, a powder keg that helped to ignite the American Revolution, which is why the Constitution's framers drew a hard line. The Third and Fourth Amendments were their answer. A person's home, property, and person are off limits to arbitrary power because those are sacred spaces. The revolution was in no small part about declaring, here the government stops. A declaration that in America, the individual is sovereign. The government cannot treat people as suspects or enemies without cause. This week, the Supreme Court blew a hole straight through that principle. Tom Nichols writes in The Atlantic, quote, none of this is really about immigration. It's about the administration's attempt to inflame racial tensions and divide Americans and to acclimate them to the militarization of their streets and the stripping away of their constitutional protections, end quote. In the case that prompted this decision, by the way, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem v. Vasquez Perdomo, the Supreme Court stayed a lower court's order in California that had blocked the Trump administration from using what amounted to racial profiling to stop and question people that I don't even know if they have to suspect them of being undocumented. They're just throwing things against the wall and saying, hey, here's a bunch of people. Some of you might be undocumented. In plainer English, ICE agents now have the high court's blessing to racially profile people during immigration sweeps in Los Angeles. They're allowed to stop people based solely on their apparent race or ethnicity, language or accent, the type of work they do, where they do it. The Fourth Amendment requires reasonable suspicion before anyone, any person, citizen or not, documented or not, can be stopped by law enforcement. The law is not allowed to just guess at that because of how you look or speak or where you live and work, that you might have committed a crime. Equal protection forbids race as a factor. The lower courts enforced that principle. The Supreme Court just erased it. And perhaps the most outrageous part, the conservative majority in the Supreme Court issued their decision using the so-called shadow docket, where the court rules on Trump administration's emergency motions without oral arguments or explanation. No hearing, no accountability, just judicial fiat, handed down in the dark. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her powerful dissent, wrote, quote, we should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job. Rather than stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost, I dissent, end quote. I dissent. This ruling isn't about immigration. It tells millions of Americans that your protection from unreasonable search and seizure depends on whether the government decides you look like you belong, which is not what the Constitution's framers envisioned, I hope. Certainly not democracy as we have come to know it in this country. Consider Brian Gavidia, a U.S. citizen from East Los Angeles, who voted for Trump, by the way. Shouldn't be relevant, but he did. He says federal agents shoved him against a fence, twisted his arm, and demanded to know which hospital he was born in, all because he looked Latino. In other words, because he looked like an immigrant, or let me put it more clearly, he looked like an undocumented immigrant. He told the agents repeatedly, "I am an American." They didn't believe him. Speaking to The Guardian, he says his business remains closed because he's afraid that agents might return. He worries he's being watched. Despite his fears, Brian says he won't stop speaking out. Quote, "I'm doing this with my legs shaking and my voice cracking because I'm scared, but I will not stay quiet." This is the new normal that the Supreme Court has sanctioned. And when Justice Brett Kavanaugh tried to defend it, his words only underscored how hollow his reasoning was. In his concurring opinion, the only one that was offered, by the way, reflecting solely his own views, he wrote, without a hint of irony, quote, "The interests of individuals who are illegally in the country in avoiding being stopped by law enforcement for questioning is ultimately an interest in evading the law. That is not an especially weighty legal interest," end quote. Kavanaugh's framing flips the entire constitutional order on its head. The Fourth Amendment is not about rewarding the innocent and punishing the guilty. It exists precisely to protect people even when the government suspects them of wrongdoing. Rights are not conditional favors granted after innocence is proven. They are the shield against arbitrary suspicion in the first place. Kavanaugh's distorted logic seems to suggest that if you're brown, you're guilty of an immigration violation until you're proven innocent. As one of the nation's top constitutional law experts, Erwin Chemerinsky, put it, the Supreme Court has abandoned basic constitutional principles, and the broader implications are darker still. Most of the Bill of Rights is premised on the idea that liberty is more important than granting government limitless discretion in the name of law enforcement. By Kavanaugh's reasoning, any Fourth Amendment protection could be reframed as nothing more than an interest in evading the law. I don't want police in my house because I'm just trying to evade the law. I don't want you looking through my papers because there's law-breaking stuff in there. That's not just sloppy logic. It's dangerous. It's an attack on the entire American legal tradition. And the fact that I have to stand here to report that the Bill of Rights is exactly that, a declaration of rights, not revocable privileges, because a Supreme Court decision suggests otherwise, says an awful lot. You know how many days of law school I have under my belt? 0. But this is where we are in 2025. It's not that the conservative justices don't understand the Constitution. It's that they seemingly don't care. As Chemerinsky observes, quote, "This is just the latest in a series of rulings in which the 6 conservative justices have approved Trump administrative actions that violate the Constitution. If the court does not uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, is there anything to protect our constitutional democracy?" And it bears repeating that most of the plaintiffs in these cases were U.S. citizens or lawful immigrants. In one case, ICE tackled and arrested a U.S. citizen and veteran, George Rettas, detaining him for 3 days following a worksite raid. Another U.S. citizen was tackled on her way to work. The 4'11" woman was then accused of assaulting the ICE agent by putting her hand out as the agent ran her over, according to NBC News reporting. Yet another was arrested and removed from his job because he did not carry his passport, only his driver's license. Can you imagine that? Just for all of you citizens out there, you are not compelled to carry your passport to show it to ICE agents. What this decision does is it normalizes roving patrols in a police state where constitutional rights shrink or vanish in the government if they declare you the enemy. Once the Fourth Amendment is treated as negotiable for one group, Latino communities, brown people in this case, it becomes weaker for all of us. And if we don't see the danger in that, if we don't call it what it is, we are in deeper trouble than we even realize. It all points to something bigger. The Supreme Court's conservative majority has essentially stopped pretending to be neutral arbiters of law. And using this so-called shadow docket has become their weapon of choice, used to gut precedent, to countenance overreach, to weaken democracy's foundations without public deliberation. No transparency, no accountability. It's just because we said so. And that should trouble every American, no matter what your politics or background. More than 2 centuries ago, Americans declared independence to rid themselves of kings and of unchecked power. Today, the Supreme Court appears to be dismantling those safeguards piece by piece, ruling as if its conservative majority serves one man, a president who thinks it's normal behavior to declare war on America's cities. This is who they've decided to hitch their legacy to, a would-be strongman who spits on the very Constitution that they swore to uphold, a man whose contempt for democracy will stain the Supreme Court not just today, not just this term, but possibly for generations to come. The Fourth Amendment was the framers' line in the sand. Here, the government stops. The Supreme Court may have just erased that line.